The Rich Uncle.
I never thought I should really meet my wife's rich Uncle Oliver. She has been talking about him for the last 15 years. Every time we need some money badly, my wife says,
I know, we'll write to my Uncle Oliver in America. I'm sure he'll be ready to help us.
But of course we never do. You can't really write to someone whom you have never met, asking for money, even if he is your rich uncle. He had sent us £50 when we got married, and we hadn't heard a word from him since. And now here was a letter from him, to say that he was coming back from America, and would like to visit us.
Edward, listen to this,
said my wife, who was still reading the letter.
You may be surprised, my dear Helen, that after living for 35 years in America I should want to return to England. Well, when a man feels he's getting near the end of the road, he wants to be in his own country.
What road does he mean?
The road of life. He means he may be going to die soon.
I didn't think that she sounded very sorry.
He wants to be near his own family.
She went on.
After all, blood is thicker than water. You are the only family I have now, and I would be very thankful if you would receive me into your home for a little while.
How old is your uncle? I said. He's not very old, is he?
No, he's only about 55. But it sounds as if he is ill.
Perhaps when he dies he will leave us all his money,
said my daughter Susan.
Well,
said Helen,
we must all do as much as we can for poor Uncle Oliver.
He will certainly be welcome in our house, I said, because he is your uncle, not because he is rich.
How do you know Uncle Oliver is so rich?
Said my son Martin.
He's the head of a very big company.
What sort of company? I asked.
Well, I think they make door handles.
For some reason, we all thought this was rather funny. That evening I found my wife sitting on the bed with a little smile on her face. What are you thinking about? I asked.
Oh, Uncle Oliver and his door handles. It will be the end of all our money troubles. We shall be able to buy a new car now.
We don't need your Uncle Oliver's money, I said angrily. But it was quite true that we had been having some difficulties over money. Our car was very old, and we wouldn't be able to buy a new one for some time yet. We really wanted a bigger house, too, but I didn't see how we should ever have enough money for that. This house was only just big enough for us. There were only 3 small bedrooms.
Uncle Oliver will have to sleep in your room, Susan,
said Helen.
And you can move in with Martin.
Oh, Mother. How terrible. I hope he doesn't stay long.
Now remember, Susan,
said my wife,
we must try to make Uncle Oliver's stay here as delightful as possible.
In his next letter, Uncle Oliver wrote that he hoped to be with us by the end of the month. He would come by air, he said. My wife wrote back and said that if he let us know the date and time of his arrival, we could meet him at London Airport. Uncle Oliver wrote again, saying that he wasn't sure of the exact date, and there was no need for us to meet him. He could find his way easily enough to Surbiton, where we lived. Yes, it's not very difficult, I said. I'll write myself and tell him how to get here. The airport bus will take you from London Airport into the middle of London, I wrote. Then you can get a taxi to Waterloo Station. Ask there for the next train to Surbiton. Trains leave about every 20 minutes, and Surbiton is only 12 miles from Waterloo. From Surbiton Station you can take another taxi to our house. Uncle Oliver arrived just before dinner on the last day of the month. We were sitting in the garden having a drink when the taxi stopped outside the house.
Uncle Oliver!
cried Helen, and a little man jumped out of the taxi and threw his arms round her.
It must be Helen. You are just like your mother when she was a girl. And this is your Edward.
He took my hand. He was really very small, several inches smaller than Helen. He had a thin, pointed face which seemed almost grey in colour, and hardly any hair. His clothes seemed too big for him, I noticed. Let me bring in your cases, I said.
Oh, thanks. And would you mind paying the taxi for me? I was in such a hurry to get here. I quite forgot to change some dollars into English money.
Of course. How much is it? I asked the taxi driver. We usually pay 4 shillings from Surbiton Station to our house.
£7 15 shillings, sir,
said the taxi driver. What?
It's a long way from London Airport,
said the man.
And it was a busy time of the evening.
I decided to take a taxi straight from the airport,
said Uncle Oliver.
It seemed the easiest thing to do.
Yes, of course,
said Helen with a bright smile, while I gave my last 2 £5 notes to the taxi driver.
Now come along, Uncle Oliver, and see your room.
I carried Uncle Oliver's cases up to Susan's room. There were 4 of them, and they were very heavy indeed. Now, what will you have to drink? I said, when Uncle Oliver had washed and come down again.
Only water for me, thanks. Water with plenty of ice in it.
Oh dear, we haven't got any ice.
It doesn't matter. Is something wrong with your ice box?
I'm afraid we haven't got an icebox,
said Helen.
We call them refrigerators in England, you know. We should like one, of course, but they cost a lot of money, and we don't really need one.
Uncle Oliver did not answer for a moment.
I think you are wonderful people,
he said then.
To be able to live without an icebox.
The children, who had been out with a friend, now came in and met their great-uncle. Martin looked very hard at his face and then said,
Uncle Oliver, are you really getting near the end of the road?
Martin, you must not say things like that,
cried his mother, but Uncle Oliver laughed.
My doctor in New York seems to think so. But I hope that the last part of the road will be the pleasantest if I can stay here with you. It's grand to have a family at last.
We sat down to dinner and Uncle Oliver began telling us how he first became interested in door handles. The food on his plate grew cold, but still he talked on. The rest of us had finished when he began very slowly to eat, telling us in between mouthfuls about the time when he worked as a train driver.
This is almost interesting,
said Helen, with her eye on Uncle Oliver's plate, and the children sat angrily waiting. When dinner was at last over, we went into the sitting room.
Now, where do you and Edward usually sit?
Asked Uncle Oliver.
I don't want to take your chair.
Oh, we don't have any special chairs, we sit anywhere,
said Helen, and Uncle Oliver at once sat down in the big red chair where I always sit. It's the only chair in the room which I really like.
Would you like to see the paper?
Said Helen, and passed him the newspaper which I was just going to read myself. I expect you'll want to go to bed early tonight, I said, sometime later. You must be tired after your long journey.
Tired? Not a bit,
said Uncle Oliver.
Can I take you out for a drink somewhere?
Well, I don't think.
You can go to the ship hotel, Edward,
said Helen.
I'll stay here with the children.
I was feeling quite tired myself, but I got out the car and we drove off to the ship hotel. Uncle Oliver thought the ship hotel was wonderful, except that they didn't seem to have any ice. He thought the people there were wonderful, too, and he wanted to buy them all drinks. I had just enough money left to pay for the drinks. The next day I was able to leave the office early, and it was only 5:30 when I got home. Helen was having tea. Where's Uncle Oliver? I said.
He has gone shopping again. I asked him what he wanted to do this morning, and he said he would like to go into the town with me.
I hope you took him to the bank.
Oh yes, we went there first. Then he asked if he could help me with my shopping. I thought he wouldn't find much in Surbiton to interest him, but he seemed to think everything was wonderful. He bought so many things that he couldn't carry them all, and we had to come home in a taxi. And then this afternoon he said he had some more shopping to do, and went off, smiling to himself.
The shops are shut now, so I expect he'll be back soon. Well, what's this? A large white car had stopped outside our garden, and a man in a green coat was coming up the door. Helen opened the door.
Mrs. Hill?
He said.
We've come to deliver your refrigerator.
Refrigerator? But I haven't ordered a refrigerator. There must be some mistake.
No mistake, madam. The gentleman told us quite plainly that it was for Mrs. Hill, of this address. He said that it must be delivered immediately.
Uncle Oliver, I said. Was it a small gentleman who spoke like an American?
Yes, that's right. Now, where shall we put this refrigerator?
We had a very small kitchen. Uncle Oliver had bought a very large refrigerator. When at last it was in position, it seemed to fill nearly half the room. Soon after the men left, Uncle Oliver returned, in a taxi, of course. I was just going to tell him that the refrigerator was much too big for us and must be changed for a smaller one, when Helen threw her arms round him and cried.
Oh, Uncle Oliver, what a wonderful, wonderful present.
After this, it seemed too late to do anything about it. The next day was Saturday, so I didn't have to go to work. After breakfast I said, "Now, who's going to help me to clean the car?" "Martin?" "Susan?"
Sorry, Father, not just now.
They both rushed off.
May I help you, Edward?
Said Uncle Oliver. "That's very good of you." For the next hour I cleaned the car while Uncle Oliver stood with a cloth in his hand, talking about his experience of driving in every part of America. From time to time he touched the car gently with the cloth. After I'd finished the car I went into the garden to read the newspaper. But Uncle Oliver sat down beside me and went on talking, so I couldn't read. At last I went inside and left him there. When I came out again there was no sign of him. He appeared before lunch, smiling.
"I've been talking to Daisy,"
he said.
"She's a delightful person, isn't she?"
"Daisy? Who is Daisy?" He looked very surprised.
"But you must know her. She's your neighbor."
"Oh, you mean Miss Riddle?" "Yes, of course we know her, but not well enough to call her by her first name. You see, she has only been here for about 6 months. In fact, we had hardly spoken to Miss Riddle. She was a quite little woman of about 25, who didn't spend much time in her garden. I was surprised that Uncle Oliver seemed to have such a high opinion of her. In the afternoon Uncle Oliver said he didn't feel very well and went to lie down.
I thought he was looking tired.
Said Helen.
You shouldn't have let him clean the car. A man in his condition ought to be more careful.
Has he told you what's wrong with him?
No, and I don't want to ask him. But he certainly doesn't look healthy.
Do you think Uncle Oliver is going to die soon?
Said Martin.
Oh, we hope not.
Said Helen quickly. Uncle Oliver stayed in bed for 4 days and ate almost nothing, but he refused to have a doctor. When I came home on the 4th day, I could see that Helen wanted to tell me something.
He has been talking about his money.
She said.
Do you know what he said to me? It will all be yours, my dear, when I'm gone.
Well, that's what you were expecting, isn't it? You didn't think he would leave it all to a dog's home.
We shall be able to buy one of those lovely new houses on the other side of the town, a new car, holidays in Italy or Greece, dresses from Paris.
Be quiet, I said angrily. The next day Uncle Oliver began to get better. By the end of 2 weeks he looked better than he had done when he arrived. His face had lost its strange grey color and he even seemed a little fatter. Of course, I only saw him in the evenings. Every evening he sat in my red chair and talked and talked and talked. I've never known a man who could talk so much. How can you bear it all day? I asked Helen one evening as we were sitting in the garden.
Oh, he's out quite a lot. He likes making bus journeys. And I think he goes next door to see Miss Riddle sometimes. We must ask her to dinner one night, to show her how thankful we are.
Where is he now?
He asked if he could use the telephone.
Half an hour later, Susan came running into the garden.
Who do you think I've been speaking to?
She said.
You'll never guess. A man in New York.
In New York.
Yes, on the telephone. I was passing through the hall when Uncle Oliver was telephoning, and he asked me if I wanted to speak to someone in New York. So I did. We talked for 3 or 4 minutes.
Helen and I looked at each other.
How many pounds a minute does it cost to telephone New York?
Said Helen. We shall find out when we get our next telephone bill. And you know, he hasn't paid me back for the taxi from the airport.
He doesn't think about these things, because money isn't important to him.
Well, I said, I think Uncle Oliver ought to find another place to live. He has been here 6 weeks now, and it has seemed a very long 6 weeks.
Oh, Edward! How can we ask him to leave when he's in such a poor state of health? If he really is, near the end of the road.
My dear Helen, Uncle Oliver is looking better and better every day. I think he will surprise you. He certainly did. He appeared the next evening just before dinner with a wide smile on his face.
Helen! Edward! I have some news for you. I am going to be married.
Married?
Said Helen.
But what about?
That's wonderful news, I said quickly, taking Uncle Oliver by the hand.
You have brought me back to health.
He went on.
I came here a sick man, and now I feel healthier than I've felt for years. I didn't tell you that I went to see a doctor last week, a special doctor in London. Today I got his report. He thinks I'll live for years yet. So now there's nothing to stop me from marrying the woman I love.
Is it someone in America? I asked.
In America? Certainly not. I'm going to marry Daisy, of course.
So we still haven't got all Uncle Oliver's money. I'm glad, really. I don't want to be very rich. I'm quite satisfied with the £20,000 which Uncle Oliver gave us when he got married.